That's partly why they bloat up this figure. So that 3% window is larger. But the reality is, all these past financial years, the bloated figure they project is never attainable because that money in reality is not there. An expanding and unpredictable resource envelope creates room for expenditure that escapes adequate scrutiny, particularly under classified allocations whose proportional limits are tied to the overall size of the budget. In effect, the larger the envelope, the greater the scope for opaque spending, often justified under national security, but subjected to limited oversight. It is precisely these weaknesses in fiscal credibility and discipline that necessitate a renewed focus on what truly matters: safeguarding lives, securing livelihoods, and strengthening institutions. We must move away from reckless expansion and towards strategic recovery. To safeguard lives is to invest meaningfully in healthcare and education. Our healthcare remains critically underfunded, receiving only about 6% of the national budget, far below the Abuja target of 15%. The consequences are clear, ladies and gentlemen. Understaffed hospitals, frequent drug stockouts, and high maternal mortality. We must prioritize primary healthcare, recruit and retain health workers, and ensure consistent availability of essential medicines. And we do have that money. Ladies and gentlemen, each of us is getting a copy of the alternative budget priorities that we have broken down with the figures. I'd like to implore us to find time in the coming days and read it, because we break down where the money is. Some people say, you want us to do all these different things. Where is the money? The money is actually available. On an annual basis, we lose over 10 trillion shillings to corruption. That's according to the Inspectorate of Government. That's a government figure. And when you get a figure from government, it is obvious they have tried to panel beat it a bit so that it doesn't look as grotesque as it really is. There's a lot of wasteful expenditure in this account. So we do have money. So as I do share this is pretty much a summary, but I'd like to encourage us, please find time and read. Many times people say, but where are the alternatives? Are you people just criticizing? No. It's important that we point the country in the right direction, that we show people where we ought to be moving. Government must account for false promises like the Obwa Specialized Hospital. Over 700 billion shillings has so far been spent on this botched project. But there's no hospital. When we began to make a lot of noise about this Obwa hospital, we tried to access it, we were denied access. The Minister of Health was at one time denied access to that facility, and yet the Ministry of Health is supposed to supervise it. As we kept up the pressure, they began to put up a structure. There's a shell of a structure. When you go past that road, you see a shell. But that's not the hospital that was promised. That shell does not account for the nearly 1 trillion shillings that has so far been spent on that hospital. So there's got to be accountability. This project here was presented as a remedy to the complicated medical procedures which require Ugandans to travel outside of the country at exorbitant costs. But like many other projects in this our country, it's a complete failure. The money being spent on such white elephants should instead be injected into existing health facilities across the country, which are struggling with poor infrastructure, drug stockouts, lack of equipment, and facilitating medical personnel to do their work, including medical interns, whose services continue to be taken for granted by this government. You have heard them say, you students. These medical interns, they carry the bulk of the work that is done in these government health facilities. Some of them work for 48 hours non-stop as doctors. We have got to not take them for granted. In education, increased enrollment has not been matched with quality. We have quality education as opposed to quantity education. We have got quantity education as opposed to quality education. Overcrowded classrooms, poorly paid teachers, and inadequate infrastructure, all of which continue to undermine learning outcomes. We must not invest in just access, but in quality, ensuring that education equips our young people with real skills for the future. Safeguarding livelihoods, that's the other element in our theme, means putting the economy at the service of the people. Because it has always got to be about the people. Agriculture, which employs the majority of Ugandans, continues to be underfunded. Farmers lack access to irrigation, credit, extension services, and reliable markets. As a result of this, productivity remains low and incomes unstable. We must increase investment in agriculture. We must support value addition and strengthen rural infrastructure. In transport, the challenge is not just expansion, but maintenance. Roads deteriorate faster than they are repaired, increasing costs for businesses and limiting access to markets. We must prioritize maintenance, improve contract management, and invest in alternative transport systems such as rail and water. Where is the money? It is available, and we have broken down all of that. The other element of our theme is safeguarding institutions. No country, none whatsoever, can progress without strong institutions. Today we see growing concerns around accountability, transparency, and governance. Public funds are not always used efficiently. Oversight is weakened. Corruption continues to erode public trust. We must strengthen institutions such as the Auditor General, the Inspectorate of Government, and Parliament's oversight committees. Public resources must be managed transparently, and those who misuse them must be held accountable. Let me talk about another elephant in the room: the impending sovereignty bill. Honorable colleagues and distinguished guests, as we reflect on the direction of our country, we must also turn our attention to the impending sovereignty bill, which has got far-reaching implications for governance, rights, and Uganda's place in the global community. At face value, the idea of sovereignty is appealing. Every nation has got the right to protect its independence and determine its own path. However, we must ask ourselves a fundamental question: whose sovereignty are we safeguarding? Is it the sovereignty of the Ugandan people or the unchecked power of the states? There is growing concern that this proposed legislation may be used not as a shield to protect national interests, but as a tool to insulate government actions from scrutiny, both domestically and internationally. If framed properly, such a law risks weakening constitutional safeguards, limiting civic space, and undermining the very institutions we seek to strengthen. Honorable members and our guests this morning, Uganda's sovereignty is already anchored in our country's constitution, the grand norm. It resides in the people, and it ought to be exercised through democratic institutions that are accountable, transparent, and bound by the rule of law. Any attempt to expand this concept must therefore be approached with caution and with full regard to constitutional principles. We must also recognize that Uganda does not exist in isolation. Our economy, our security, and our development are deeply connected to regional and global systems. International partnerships, trade agreements, and development cooperation have played a critical role in supporting our growth. A law that appears to withdraw Uganda from these frameworks or to disregard international obligations risks isolating the country, discouraging investment, and undermining economic stability. Now that we're talking about the budget. Furthermore,